Hello. Oh no. Sorry. I didn't mean to look so angry for a second there. Hello, Noelle. Hello, Eel. We're just starting. You didn't miss anything. But if you aren't aware, I am reading, let's see, starting at page 72 tonight. So I suppose you may have missed something in that sense if you aren't caught up with the story. Yes. I'm still so excited and thrilled that Magical Girl Raising Project Restart is getting an anime. That's so exciting to me. I'm going to go over our little cast list we have. Let's see. Petchka is voiced by Scrappy, our headmate Scrappy. We have myself voicing Clantail, Nonoko Miyokata, Melville, and the narrator. I have Cuddle voicing Lapis Lazuli. Snuggle is voicing Noko. Q, wait. We have Q as Genosaiko Yumenoshima, but I think she died. I can't seem to remember if that was 100% confirmed at this point. Then we have Magenta voicing Rionetta and Flea. Have Chalky voicing Meow Meow. Scruffy voicing Shadowgale. Scare. Scooper. No, we have Scare voicing Detect Bell. Scooper as himself. We have Pookie voicing Keek. And Gadget voicing Fall. Scooper voicing Scooper. Oh, you might have went to bed, Noelle, when this happened, but when Cuddle did the comic reading, the Sonic comic reading, there was a moment where a character was screaming and Scooper was also screaming, so Cuddle asked, "Did you say this line?" And he did. So well. We need to highlight that later. I wish we typed down what timestamp that happened at so we don't have to look for that. But I'm sure it'll be worth it. Okay, let's see. Shadowgale. The shop in the Evil King's castle, the final area, was the final shop of the game, in other words. Of course the goods were powerful, expensive, and their circulation limit numbers were low. There was a weapon plus 10 and a shield plus 10. Both were insanely expensive. What's more, they were limited to just one each. Only one of each item is for sale, commented Flea. And they're expensive to boot. We wouldn't be able to buy these even if we defeated 100 fiends. The master predicted we'd all be scrambling to get at these first, assuming we weren't united, that is. But now they had settled on the goal of attempting to defeat the Evil King as a unified group. Unitified? Sorry. They had to pool all their candy to buy the items, then give them to the player who seemed like they'd be most effective with them. Their plan may have been for the players to fight among themselves over the limited number of powerful weapons. This means that in unifying, we've surpassed the Master's expectations. Only the smug-faced Flea knew how seriously she meant that. Except for Unitified. Love to see it. Also, I just remembered I wanted to skip ahead and just see if I can just know ahead where a good starting point would be. Let's see. think I'll stop at, there's a good break at 1:38, I think. Okay, I'll try to remember that. Oop. Let's see. They decided to give the weapon +10 to Melville and have Clantail use the shield +10. Of course, receiving powerful weapons was not entirely cause for excitement. In accepting this powerful weapon and shield, these girls were essentially being told that they'd be fighting at the front of the pack when the time came. I'll just do my best not to get in the way, Shadowgale was thinking, when Flea said, "Oh, Mamori, you have the dragon shield, the strongest of them all, so be sure to fight the hardest. I've entrusted you a very important position at the rear because I have great expectations for you in combat." "Can I trade with someone else?" Shadowgale asked. "You've been using it longest, so you must be used to it." Shadowgale wanted to slap Flea's face for making such a remark so nonchalantly. Would she at least be allowed to flick her on the forehead? The other items included a stun gun, this late in the game, for some reason. The stun gun was on sale at the shop. At the shop was a stun baton type, and it was used by touching it to your opponent and pushing a button on the handle with your thumb to send an electric current running through it. The encyclopedia said its effect on enemies of the evil class was instantaneous, knocking out any evil type enemy immediately and keeping them out for 30 minutes. Then there was the even more confusing flamethrower. The flamethrower, successfully shrunk to machine gun size, was small enough that it was easy to handle and swing around, even for a small-statured magical girl. Just like the stun gun, it was very effective on evil-type enemies, and 3 sprays of flame would burn the enemy black. Shadowgale purchased a flamethrower to test it out, pointing it at the sky off the terrace and pulling the trigger. It spewed a massive flame about 6 feet in diameter, and the heat and size of the flames made her wince and yelp. By evil type, did they mean the fiends and wraiths? Those are demon type, apparently. That's so confusing. There are no evil type monsters in the Monster Encyclopedia. Most likely right here. Flea pointed to the question mark spots in the Monster Encyclopedia. There were only 2 types of enemies left that were listed as question marks. In other words, 2 that they hadn't encountered yet. This is where the evil type monsters go. 2 types left, and one of them at least would be the Evil King. The other would be a secondary boss before the Evil King, or random encounters that would show up on their way there. Of course, even if they were the latter, that didn't mean they were trash mobs. Often, large numbers proved far more daunting than a weaker boss. I wouldn't even be able to laugh if we beat the Evil King with a stun gun or a flamethrower, said Shadowgale. It would be a fitting end to this ridiculous mess. They took turns on watch until the meal was over, set up their formation again, and resumed their advance. Shadowgale was marching after them, all at the tail. The sight of the whole crowd going forward, shields up, aside from Melville, who couldn't equip a shield due to the nature of her weapon, reminded her of a bomb squad she'd once seen on TV. Nonoko Miyokata, who was at the rear with Shadowgale, poked Pechka in front of her to talk to her. Every poke startled Pechka, making her jump, and Shadowgale had to feel sorry for her. And since Nonoko didn't seem at all like she was paying attention to their surroundings, that meant as they walked, Shadowgale had to be on guard for attacks or followers from behind. It was exhausting. Meow! But still, she cheered herself up by telling herself she had a better deal than Lazaline and the 3 up front doing the hard work of searching for traps as they advanced. Their progress was slow. They would occasionally set off traps, then turn right and go forward again, over and over. Since the hallway went in an inward turning spiral, the farther they got, the shorter the straightaways became. Shadowgale turned on her magical phone and activated the map application to check how far they'd come. One player icon was displayed about 2/3 of the way down the route. "You've gotten pretty far," she thought, but at the same time she recalled that she was the only member of her party, so she didn't feel much better. From that point onward, they continued to prioritize safety as they advanced, intermittently breaking for meals and dealing with over 100 traps until the whole party arrived at their goal point. While everything around them, walls, ceiling, and furnishings, was white marble, what blocked their way at the end of the hallway was a wooden door. They didn't have to speculate about what lay beyond it. Someone blew out of breath. Shadow exhaled a deep sigh as well. The game was about to end. The road had been long. It had been only around 2 weeks, but it had felt so long. 6 people had died to get them this far. Lazaline, who had been checking the door, raised both her arms to make a circle. "No traps." "Is it locked?" said Flea. "Nope. I figure pushing it should open it up." "Then please do." Lazaline gently pushed the door, and it opened inward with a creak. When they peeked inside, it seemed to be a room. What looked like an armor-clad knight and plastic robot stood side by side. They seemed like decorations, but then they started moving, and the magical girls raised their weapons and shields. Noko. The knight had horns like a dragon and a large reptilian tail. And if the tail was anything like the horns, it was probably a dragon's too. Noko was startled, recalling at Meow Meow, but the knight strode toward them, heedless of her reaction. Oh yeah, I just have to let you know, Meow Meow's name has an @ symbol in front of it. And I thought, you don't say the @ symbol out loud. But in reading the next book, which is a collection of short stories about the magical girls, it is stated you do read the @ symbol out loud. So I'm going to start calling her @Meow Meow instead of just Meow Meow. Anyway. A helmet and face guard covered its head, casting its visage in shadow, so she couldn't really see it. Swiftly, the knight pulled a massive 2-handed sword from the scabbard on its back. "Oh, welcome, Faybot! How are you tonight?" "Meow, Scooper wants to know." The robot was floating in the air. There was something like a backpack strapped to its back, spurting flame. Its red eyes were plastic, just like its body, and its whole form made it clear that it had been created by people. In midair, it spread all 4 limbs out, and small objects flew out of its backpack toward them, trailing white smoke. Missiles? Noko held her shield at a diagonal, dropping her right knee to the marble floor to prepare for the impact. She felt the thunderous shaking of the explosion as thick white smoke billowed up. It looked like someone else had blocked it. Then something sliced through the white smoke above. When Noko raised her head, the robot had paused in the air, splayed out again. Noko was about to turn her shield around to face the new direction when she heard a cry from behind her. Following that came the sound of metal hitting metal. "It's an evil king's knight and a hell jester. Non-elemental. No weaknesses or strengths." Flea, in the middle of checking the monster encyclopedia, took a hit and was slammed into Noko's back. Shield still up, Noko rolled forward, then somehow regained her balance with her shield facing above her when heat and another shock hit her and launched her backward into a wall. Flea was grimacing, but she continued to cling to her magic carpet, refusing to let go, and just barely staying in place. She wasn't looking at the monster encyclopedia anymore. It had been knocked to the ground. She yelled, "No weaknesses or strengths! Just hammer them down!" Through the billowing white smoke, Noko could see a faint black shadow 15 feet ahead. It was raising something up. Noko braced her shield and blocked the attack, but her arm felt numb. After blocking a second and then third attack, her arm couldn't handle anymore, and she dropped the shield. It hit the floor with a clang, and she abandoned it there and darted to the side. The knight's sword left a violent gash in the marble floor, a visceral reminder of the knight's physical prowess and sharp blade. Gradually, the white smoke cleared. Rising to her knees, Noko looked around in horror. Lazaline and was... Wait, it says Lazaline and was trading blows with a knight. Are they missing a word there? Melville was targeting the robot flying above them with her javelins. Nonoko and her dragon had trapped another knight between them in a pincer attack. Rianetta and Clantail were defending Petchka from 3 more knights. Detectbell and Shadowgale were being pushed farther and farther back, unable to even attack. He's just so surprised with this news. And Flea huddled on her magic carpet, shield still up, continuously blocking a stream of attacks and unable to escape. There were as many enemies as there were magical girls. Ooh, art stuff! I'm glad to hear that. I would love to know about the art stuff. If you would be wanting to share. Scooper, do I need to pick you up? Is that what you want? Oh, you're so heavy. Oh, you are so heavy. Oh, you got on my headphones. Hang on. Okay. Oof. You are so large. Okay. Each and every one of them was stronger than any monster so far, aside from the great dragon. The knights' swords were unusually powerful and heavy, and Noko couldn't even block their strikes entirely. Her arm was still tingling, and she couldn't get it to move right. Now that Noko was without her shield, the enemy swung at her again. She jumped back to avoid the blow, but couldn't dodge it entirely. She hadn't escaped the knight's range. Its sword was massive and long. Noko swung her mop, throwing her entire body into a strike against the flat of the knight's blade to forcefully change its trajectory. But the power behind the knight's swing knocked her down, and she banged her shoulder against the wall. She couldn't dodge the next swing, so she blocked it with her mop in place of the shield. The lone hit bent her weapon plus 7 mop, which she'd pay a high price for in candy. Who beat Hollow Knight? Under 5 hours. Nice. Someone screamed. Petchka. Noko wanted to plug her ears. Screaming was not what she wanted to hear right now. She mustered an aggressive desire to destroy their enemies, to take over her heart. Ow! Oof. She filled herself with the kind... Oh, he went down, I think. Oof. She filled herself with the kind of fighting spirit that would make you put your life on the line for the sake of your allies, to fight heroically and spread it to the others around her. If any of the girls had the time to scream, she should be taking down one more enemy instead. She transmitted these feelings to all around her. Noko stood up, smacking the knight's sword hilt hard with her bent mop to lock weapons with her enemy, but the knight easily knocked her back again. It was so much stronger.
I'm not going to let this beat me,
she thought, and she struck it again with her mop as she launched her indomitable spirit around her. Petchka raised her shield and joined the front lines, which lessened the strain on Rianetta and Clantail, who had been forced to protect her. Clantail pulled out her magical phone and switched it on. Countless spears had been thrust into the floor around her. Clantail transformed her body into a great octopus, grabbed a spear in each tentacle, and assaulted the knights. At this point, it was hard to tell who was the monster. Noko kept on praying.
Fight, 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 fight.
Melville focused on fixing her aim, ignoring the missile coming at her. The blast hit her as she flung her javelin to destroy the robot's booster. The robot lost its balance, went into a tailspin, and plunged into the floor. Blood streaming from her head, Melville chucked another javelin to destroy the robot's head entirely. But though that should have finished it off, it raised itself up again,
What?
thought Noko, but the robot immediately grabbed at one of the knights fighting nearby. This confused Noko for a moment until she figured out that Rianetta had to be controlling it. Lazaline slammed a knight into the wall with a roundhouse kick, then rushed in for a flurry of punches from both hands, hammering the thick metal armor out of shape. Waiting until the moment a knight raised its sword, Lee leaped at it from her magic carpet, wrapped her arms around the knight's neck, and wrenched it upside down. Unable to withstand the coordinated assault from Nanako and her dragon, another knight dropped its sword and fell to its knees, and Detecbel and Shadowgale were somehow managing to hold their own too. With things like this, one of them would surely come in soon to help Noko. Brandishing her mop, Noko was relieved. Defeated, the knights fell to the ground in pieces of armor. The robot remained as a lump of plastic and iron, away from them in the corner of the hallway. In 2 hours, it would vanish. Nonoko was indignant.
I can't believe they didn't give us any living creatures. Now then, are we ready?
Said Flea. They had healed up. The recovery medicine had cured all of them, both the girls with serious injuries and the ones who had received milder wounds. Those, like Noko, whose weapons had broken, borrowed from those who had extra. All of them were 100% prepared, weapons and shields at the ready. They heard the tense hum of Melville pulling her bowstring taut. The room the knights and robot had occupied was perfectly square, about 30 square feet in area, and there was a door on the other end that led onward. It was a size smaller than the way they'd come in, but garishly decorated. It was metal, engraved with faces in various states of agony. Its black shone in contrast with the white of the marble. It was sickening, pompous, and sinister. Noko looked at the map application on her phone. The room beyond this door was the end of the Evil King's castle. That meant once they opened this door, they'd have reached their goal. Oh, cool, stream stuff. I'm excited to see that. Lazaline, done investigating the gate, made a circle with her arms.
No traps, and it's not locked. It opens like normal.
Good, said Flea.
Then everyone to your positions.
Their strongest fighters were at the front. Those who weren't as good came next, and those who were, frankly speaking, more of a drag came after that. Melville, who could attack from a distance, followed at the rear. We are prepared. You're all powerful, but still, as long as the Evil King's strength is an unknown, our powers may not be enough. If it seems victory is impossible, run as fast as you can. As long as we all survive, there will be a way. Flea shot Clantail a look, signaling her to slowly, carefully open the door. The room was completely undecorated on the inside, featuring only a single chair inside the pure white marble space. It was magnificent, the sort that a king would sit on in a game, in manga, or some other story. It was worthy of being called a throne. Noko glanced at Pechka beside her. Pechka looked like she didn't understand what she was seeing. Cautiously, Clantail and Lazaline entered, and the other magical girls followed. Even once they were inside, nothing happened, and the girls gradually became bolder and willing to explore more freely. Still, nothing. The room was silent except for the noises the girls made themselves as they milled about. Hold on, there's something written on the back of the chair. There were markings like text carved into the marble backrest. Flea activated Translator Buddy to translate the writing into Japanese. The display on the app said, "The Evil King is absent and is currently being chased around by 15 magical girls. Please come again."
What?
Flea touched the throne with her hand, and then her magical phone sounded with an alert, signaling the arrival of an announcement. A player has reached the Evil King's
Hi, I'm
throne.
Justin and I'm friends with Meadow.
Oh! Also, hello, Flower Heart. Welcome. Um, Flea touched the throne with her hand, and then her magical phone sounded with an alert, signaling the arrival of an announcement. A player has reached the Evil King's throne and fulfilled the condition for memory unlock. The Evil King's crisis will raise the monster's morale. The monster's level will now rise. On a basic level, the message had to mean that the monsters had gotten stronger, but Noko didn't understand what was going on or why. Where is the Evil King? Plantail muttered. None of them could give her an answer. What do you think about the fact that Raising Project will restart? We'll get an adaptation. I am so excited for that. I'm so happy they're finally continuing the anime. I'm so excited to see so much of what happens in this book come to life. Like all the locations and monsters, and of course all the characters. Can hardly wait. Petchka. They investigated every inch of the throne room and still couldn't find a thing. They searched the castle but uncovered no messages or hints, and of course neither did they encounter the Evil King. They were all confused and angry. It was as if the ladder they were climbing had suddenly been moved. Right when they had been thinking they had nearly reached their objective, that they could finish this game, the goalpost had vanished. Lee used her magical phone to summon Fall. Even before she started asking questions, Fall was agitated and bouncing side to side, scattering gold powder.
The Evil King must exist, Poon. Absolutely, Poon.
But the reality is that no one's here, Lee replied.
The Evil King absolutely exists, Poon. The defeat of the Evil King is in the game's win condition, Poon.
Fall twisted 3 times in midair before returning to the original position. The cloud of the golden powder made it difficult to see the black and white form.
Your enemy must be somewhere. Somewhere, Poon. Maybe in one of the other areas, Poon.
I'll ask this one more time. The Evil King must be inside the game, is that correct?
The Evil King absolutely 100% has to be here, Poon. The game was made to be possible to complete, Poon.
I'm so happy about it, yes. I'm so excited. The Nonoko, Rianetta, and Petchka trio was sitting in chairs in the library area. Nonoko and Rianetta's expressions were both grim. Petchka figured the look on her own face, had to be full of despair, too. They couldn't find the Evil King. Final enemy, the one they absolutely needed to finish the game, was nowhere to be found. Right now, all the magical girls were searching around again to make sure they hadn't overlooked it somewhere in one of the areas they'd explored so far. Plantail was absent, off helping another team that needed another fighter. Nonoko, Rianetta, Petchka, and Nonoko's pet dragon were the team in charge of exploring the library area. Let's hope Studio will not mess up this adaptation. I think I heard that that it's the same studio that did season 1, so I think it will be good. I also, from reading the episodes book and how they put some of those in the anime for the first season, I hope they do the same with Restart. There were some good stories in there, especially the last one that comes after Restart happens. I think that would be a really good way to end the Restart anime. They include that one. That was very cute. The library area was comparatively small, and since they'd scoured this place for the red books needed to unlock the following area, this was also the most thoroughly explored of all the areas. They didn't know what else they could find. They tried searching different places at random, knocking down bookshelves and kicking over the long tables in search of hidden doors and rooms. They couldn't find any clues anywhere. Tired of searching, they fought monsters instead, but that just wore them out, so the trio ended up just sitting on some chairs and sighing.
Perhaps the evil king isn't anywhere,
Rianetta said to no one in particular.
Perhaps this game has no evil king at all. This quest is all a fool's errand to defeat a non-existent boss. My, the Fall said the evil king is somewhere, said Nonoko. Do you sincerely believe we can trust that creature?
Rianetta smacked the table, and the one hit broke the old, tilting piece of furniture in a cloud of dust and wood chips. Then Rianetta kicked the broken table into a bookshelf where it smashed into a mess of countless wood shards on the floor. Petchka bit back a shriek. Seeing Rianetta storming around frightened her, but she figured that if she made any noise now, Rianetta might get even angrier and turn her rage on Petchka. So she couldn't say anything. Petchka was tired too, and utterly disheartened at the missing evil king. But even so, seeing someone angry made her jumpy. In this way, Petchka's cowardice helped her avoid conflict, but she wasn't the only one present.
Shut up,
said Nonoko.
What?
Replied Rianetta.
What does yelling and hitting things solve, Hein? Well, aren't we self-important? There's nothing good about negative thinking. Then why don't you suggest one decent idea? Feel quite free to usher in the evil king from who knows where. Perhaps you could rescue us all from this place. If I could, I'd have already done that, Scythe.
Rianetta stood up.
Your constant pseudo-foreign interjections are driving me perfectly mad.
Not to be defeated, Nonoko Miyokata stood up as well.
You have a problem with my personality unique? I'm saying that attempting to define your personality based on such trait reveals a terribly plebeian character. Oh, that's rich coming from the character with fake posh articulation, darling.
Rianetta grabbed Nonoko by the collar.
You do well to consider that my patience is not infinite.
The pair's voices were swiftly rising in both volume and pitch. Petchka wanted to plug her ears, but she couldn't do that. Conversely, she couldn't stop them either. She couldn't even burst into tears. All she could manage was to half stand from her chair, flustered and fidgeting. Rianetta gripped Nonoko's collar even harder, wrenching her to her feet, while Nonoko grabbed Rianetta's right hand in an attempt to stop her. Rianetta grabbed the interfering wrist with her own left hand, and both of them leaned in close to glare at each other. Characters are fighting! Nonoka's dragon roared. The sound was unlike that of a bird or beast, a cry of anger that they'd heard many times before in the subterranean area. It roared once, spreading its green wings wide and swooping at the pair. It opened its great maw, lined with rows of sharp fangs, to crunch into Rianetta's right shoulder. Nonoko was startled, and so was Rianetta, as she silently shouted with rage. She flailed her right arm, but the dragon wouldn't let go. Nonoko ordered the beast to stop, but it didn't seem to hear and kept its fangs in deep. Rianetta smashed her arm and the dragon's head into a bookshelf, but it still wouldn't let go. In fact, it tightened its jaws even more. They could hear something in Rianetta's arm break. Rianetta screamed and extended the claws on her right hand. Petchka stood up from the chair, and Nonoko leaped at Rianetta in an attempt to stop her. But she was too late. Just as she'd done many times before in the subterranean area, Rianetta stroked the dragon's neck with her claws. The weapon she wielded now had higher plus modifications than the ones she used back when fighting in the subterranean area, So she cut open the dragon's hard scales like so much paper craft, slicing deep into skin, muscle, fat, blood vessels, everything. Even from where Pechka was standing, she could see how deep the wound was. An instant later, blood was spurting from the gash. The dragon hit the floor with a thud. Nonoko burst into tears as she tried to use a recovery medicine from her magical phone, but it wouldn't work. Rianetta was paler than Nonoko, her injured arm dangling as she watched Nonoko mashing her magical phone. Rianetta's right sleeve was torn, exposing her arm. The holes in it were equal to the number of the dragon's fangs, and it was even cracked, too. She looked just like a broken and discarded doll. Maybe I'll show the picture now. Pechka? Maybe it was just because Pechka thought she looked like a cast-off toy, but Rianetta's voice seemed empty and artificial. She was apparently addressing Pechka, but it sounded like she was just talking to herself. Meow, that's what she said. Yeah, the character arc.
Will you come with me?
Rianetta turned to face her. She had to have been looking at Pechka, but her eyes were empty.
I've not at all lived a good life, and I'm not worthy enough to be inviting anyone to join me, but still.
Pechka bit her lip hard. She didn't know what she should say or how she should say it. She was trying to think of the thing to say that wouldn't cause conflict or harm to anyone, but she couldn't. She had something to say that might hurt to hear, but she couldn't gather the courage to say it out loud. The determination that had welled up inside her back when they'd fought the knights and Robot in the evil king's castle had long since vanished. Rianetta looked at Pechka, who replied with neither a yes nor a no, and just watched her with tears welling in her eyes. Rianetta smiled weakly and shook her head. Goodbye. She turned away from Pechka. A spray of red mottled her back. Red liquid dripped from her claws. The stench of blood wafted from every inch of her body.
Wait!
Nonoko Miyokata snapped at Rianetta as she began staggering away.
How do you plan to settle this, Hein? Don't you dare think you can just run away.
Rianetta didn't stop. She passed by the fallen chair and kept walking on.
Je will sue you! You'd better pay damages before you go!
Nonoko yelled, red-faced. She'd been holding her dragon until just a moment ago, so her face and Shrine Maiden outfit were dripping blood. Rianetta didn't stop walking and slowly wobbled away. Away? Why does it say away?
Putain!
Nonoko cursed viciously at Rianetta and then ran after her. Worried that Nonoko might hit, kick, or scream at her, Pechka reached out thinking,
I have to stop her!
And then she noticed the dark shadow on Rianetta's back.
Watch out!
Pechka's cry seemed to snap Rianetta out of her listless stride as she sluggishly responded to the fiend's attack, sitting down on a chair a little ways away from the others. She must have sat down hard as the chair rocked wildly. Rianetta flailed in her seat in an attempt to regain her balance somehow, raising her arms, and then the chair grabbed them. The seat under her transformed into a black angel and flipped them both over, pulling Rianetta from her unstable position to slam her down onto the carpet. The fiend had transformed into a chair. None of the enemies in this area had done anything like that before. The monsters had always attacked them in a straightforward manner, and the party would beat them up. And when they transformed, they'd only ever turned into living creatures. Come to think of it, the chair Rianetta had sat on had been all by itself. So had one fiend transformed into a chair beforehand to lie in wait, while another prepared to attack? Pechka ran after Nonoko. The fiend held Rianetta down, while its partner kicked her face as if it were a soccer ball. Once, twice, but the second kick came an awful sound of cracking wood. When the fiend raised its leg to unleash a third kick, Nonoko arrived to stab it with her ritual staff, a dark palm stopping her attack, grasping the rod. A wraith had passed through the bookshelf to appear in front of Nonoko, blocking her way. The fiend swung its leg down for another soccer kick, and no one was there to stop it, as it knocked Rionetta's head violently to one side. The bonnet on her head fluttered into the air. Puchka put her hand to the holy charm hanging from her neck, clenching it. Since she had this, she could damage the wraith with her attack. Puchka swung her spatula, and the wraith slipped forward to avoid her strike, then paused and leaned up against Nonoko. Wraiths could pass through objects. This still held true with the human body. The wraith sank partway into Nonoko's body, and Nonoko panicked. She flailed her staff around, but failed to connect. The wraith had blinded her with its body. The fiend responsible for the vicious soccer attacks transformed into a thin, string-like snake and passed into the wraith, covering Nonoko's face. Puchka swung her spatula 3 times at the wraith, ripping its form to pieces to repel it and remove the blindfold over Nonoko's eyes. Then she smacked the demon holding down Rionetta with her spatula, over and over. Wham, 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 scattering the black shadow. Rionetta's bonnet had come off because the string under her chin had been cut, but she was still alive. Her disheveled hair swayed this way and that as she got to her feet, pointing behind Puchka, mouth open wide. Puchka turned around. Nonoko was there. Her eyes were bulging, lips pressed tight. Blood flowed from the corners of her lips, gushing out from her bloodshot eyes and nose. Her closed lips weakened, and she spat out a clot of blood with a cough before she fell over backward. The thin, string-like black snake tried to slither out of the red mass, but Rionetta swiped at it with her claws, slicing it into 5 pieces. It dispersed into a black shadow and disappeared. Puchka selected a recovery medicine from her magical phone. Her head was all mixed up. She was panicking, confused, and crying, but this one thing she could manage calmly. The recovery medicine that she'd used on Nonoko wouldn't work. It was still inside her magical phone. She tried over and over again, but got the same thing. She couldn't use the recovery medicine. Puchka dropped to her knees on the wooden floor. A large splinter stuck in her knee, making it bleed. Her shoulders heaved as she breathed. She didn't want to understand what had just happened. None of this had ever happened before. A demon transforming into an object to take them by surprise, a wraith using its own body to blindfold them, a fiend infiltrating the body to attack from the inside. None of this had ever happened before. Oh, the Evil King's throne. When the Evil King's throne had been touched, it had brought up some kind of message on their magical phones. It had said something about the monster levels. In other words, this? Puchka heard footsteps and turned toward them. Rionetta was walking away. She turned her back on Puchka and Nonoko and was trying to leave. Puchka yelled, "Rionetta!" She didn't know what to say after that. It was just like before. She'd been unable to say anything, and because of that, now Nonoko was on the ground. The recovery medicine wasn't working. In other words, she was dead. Rionetta paused. "Why? I'm just..." she muttered and then started walking again. Her head was unsteady and her bonnet dangled from her right hand. Her left supported her broken arm. Puchka merely watched her go. Master Side number 8.
The Evil King isn't there, Pom. The Evil King isn't there, Pom.
The girl tilted her head at a 40-degree angle, eyeing Fall. It was almost impossible to divine Fall's thoughts using only body language. But still, you could get a clue as to what was going on in its mind based on the tone of voice and repetition of the question.
I suppose, considering what's going on right now, I don't even really have to guess,
the girl thought, returning her head to its original position. Her joints made a loud cracking noise.
You're wrong that the evil king isn't there.
On top of the swivel chair, the girl pulled her knees in and touched the soles of her feet together.
I don't remember ever making them play a game with no evil king. It'd be physically impossible for the win condition to be the evil king's defeat if the final boss didn't exist. There was no one on the throne, Plum. Who says the evil king has to be on the throne? The name Evil King's Castle is just a name. Nobody ever said the evil king would be there, not me, not you.
The girl touched her finger to the desk and flicked it. The swivel chair spun around.
If they can't find their enemy, then it's their fault for failing the task. There's no reason to be whining to the master about it. I want to tell them to figure it out right then and there, but the game is made so that they can figure it out after they reach the fake throne. I gave them hints too. I'm fair. I don't lie or trick people, unlike her.
Gradually, the chair's spinning sped up, even when it was whirling around so fast that the girl was too blurry to see. Her voice remained clear. The jug piled on top of the desk did not get sucked into a vortex, and the chair didn't break either. It just made odd noises as it whirled along.
By the way, hasn't Snow White come back?
Paul was silent and gave no reply to the girl's casual question. Snow White sighed. Snow White had been acting quickly since her return. She didn't need Fall to tell her that she had to hurry. She'd already scanned the list of participants, and 2 names in particular concerned her. Leaving those 2 in the game would accelerate the death toll. But having said that, if Snow White interfered directly, the other girls would face the consequences. She couldn't take out the master directly either. There had been no weaknesses in her heart. What Snow White could do was attack from another angle. She pulled some strings with an acquaintance who worked in the same division as her, saying she wanted to meet the supervisor of the Magical Girl Management Division. This acquaintance had, in the past, used her magical girl powers, for acts of violence in search of a reward. As long as Snow White had dirt on her, the girl couldn't say no. The supervisor of the Magical Girl Management Division was a typical old mage, the sort who looked down on the more recently established Magical Girl Division. No matter how Snow White begged, he would say he was obligated to follow the rules protecting classified information and refused to tell her anything. He was very proud in his role as a mage, and Snow White would never be able to dig up some weakness of his to use against him either. She would just be told to go through official channels, and that would be that. But she wouldn't make it in time that way. She had to get information about the master as quickly as possible. If Snow White's hunch was correct, this mage was the way in. She was facing the supervisor of the Magical Girl Management Division in a room that was entirely black, save for the mandala-like magical sigils shining in vibrant, varied colors. He was a very stereotypical-looking mage, with a long gray robe that fell to his feet, an impressively long white beard, and a dramatic twisted staff.
"Please, use the official channels,"
he said. She'd known he would say that.
That won't make it in time.
Not my concern.
Then I'm going to do my own investigation. So please tell me the management division password.
You think I could tell you that, fool?
His form faded and he disappeared. Snow White excused herself from the supervisor's room. She'd gotten the information she needed. When she had requested that the supervisor tell her the password, his thoughts had flowed into her. Right as he thought,
I can't let her learn the password,
she read a certain sequence of numbers and symbols from his mind. Now Snow White just had to investigate. She hurried. Chapter 9. The Children. The tech bell. The tech bell rapped on the throne at every quarter-inch interval, but no matter where she was hit, all she heard was the sound of dense, thick marble. There was nothing strange about it, and she'd already investigated everything besides this throne. this room and the room next door, floor to ceiling, and had found nothing. She'd searched anything and everything. Looking at the map, it was clear at a glance that there was no hidden rooms, but still, if there was a tiny space or little crack, there could be an item or message in there. Detective Bell sighed. Since she'd finished investigating the throne in these rooms, she had to search that stupidly long hallway next. Once the traps here were activated, they didn't go off a second time. What's more, the Evil King's castle only had what they call event monsters. Once the knights and jester were defeated, they would not respawn. They'd already confirmed those facts with Paul. But even if there were no more traps, just thinking about the great length of the hall was daunting. The other magical girls had headed out to search other areas and would be off running around in search of the Evil King, who had to be around somewhere. The plan was that if anything happened, they'd immediately contact the others, and all the girls would meet up. Seeing that so far, her magical phone had not even twitched, they must have not found anything. Lee had been calm. She was not agitated in any recognizable way. It seemed that even with Shadowgale out of her party, she was still in control. As long as Lee was calm, it meant that Shadowgale was probably not going to be up to anything. Lizaline was making a racket about the situation, but you might say that was par for the course with her. She was getting herself worked up about finding the Evil King and had apparently not yet imagined anything more frightening. Melville seemed to be one of the calmer ones, too. She was a realist. Detective Bell didn't know what she might get up to later, but she appeared to be of the opinion that now was the time to be searching for the Evil King, since she was cooperating with their search and investigation, as well as helping to defend the other girls. If reality, as Melville saw it, were to change, Detective Bell didn't know what might happen. The other magical girls were all right on the brink. One more half step and they wouldn't be able to function. Glantail only seemed calm because she didn't talk much, and Noko rarely put forth her own opinions and generally went along with what other people wanted, but both had to be emotionally wrecked. They would be imagining how to escape from this, namely the most obvious and worst conclusion that there had never been an Evil King, and that no matter how they struggled, they wouldn't be able to complete the game. They were like balloons, pumped with as much air as they could hold. If anything happened, they'd pop. Detective Bell had been like that until only recently. They'd all felt helpless, stuck with nowhere to run. They had to let out some air before they all popped. Leslie's carefree nature had helped Detective Bell do just that. Though it was frustrating to admit, Leslie's was probably a big part of why Detective Bell was feeling more at ease now. What was needed most now, in order to relieve some of the pressure, was the Evil King. Didn't even have to be the final boss itself. They just needed a trigger that would lead to some progress, a hint that would guide them to the goal. Even the smallest thing would do. Detective Bell left the king's throne room, went into the adjoining room, and exited out the other side. The long hallway coiled around and around before her eyes. I have to investigate all this? She felt ready for another sigh, but she'd figured it might be easier for her mentally if she searched the most promising sections rather than combing the whole thing. Oh, Drapesy, thank you very much for the raid. Welcome. It was decorated with statues and paintings. Those would be easier to investigate, and it seemed more likely that something would be hidden there instead of in the passage itself. Then she got an idea. Come to think of it, there was one room in this section she hadn't inspected at all yet. 11-hour stream. Oh, wow. You must be exhausted. Have a wonderful night. I hope it was fun. Carefully examining every one of the decorations in the hallway as she went, Detective Bell made her way toward the area gate, At the halfway point, she turned toward the light pouring in from the outside. It was the area shop. She stepped out onto the terrace, shielding her eyes from the glaring rays of the sun with her left hand. The air was clearer somehow. Well, it was colder here than inside, which made it seem clearer. The tech bell diligently examined the terrace railing, the post that supported it, everything. There was nothing there. She wiped her forehead. Next to the floor, she investigated the entire surface. Next to the entryway, she studied it with her magnifying glass, knocking lightly on it as she went. Just like with the railing, she found nothing. She wasn't done yet. There was an urn fixed in the center of the railing. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary urn, made of entirely regular ceramic. It was dark inside, and Detective Bell couldn't see anything. She tried sticking her arm in, but she couldn't touch the bottom. Sorry about the motorcycles. I don't know if you can hear them. You guys mix up the P and S and... Oh, Draspy! Thank you! We do things like that without noticing sometimes. I don't think it's like severe enough for us to think we have dyslexia or anything like that, but it does happen a lot. It's good to know. Draspy. It was dark inside, and Detective Bell couldn't see anything. She tried sticking her arm in, but she couldn't touch the bottom. Even after straining her fingertips as far as they would go, she still couldn't reach. It's small dyslexia. She thought about breaking it too, but before that, she activated her magical phone and clicked Use Shop. Scrolling down the list of items, she stopped on the very last one. There was an item listed there that she'd never seen before. She was baffled, confused, shocked, and then finally exuberant. She hadn't even considered that there would be a new item for sale. But when she checked the description of the new item, she was puzzled again. Her newfound joy faded a bit. Written on the screen was, Memory Restoration Device. Memory Restoration Device? She knew what the words meant. What she didn't understand was what the item actually did. Come to think of it, when they touched the throne, she recalled that they'd gotten some message about memories. Did it have to do with that? It was priced cheaply. It was the least expensive of all the items for sale in the Evil King's castle shop by a long shot. Detective Bell purchased the memory restoration device and immediately activated it. It was an application. Maybe it was a clue that would help them in their search for the Evil King. She had a powerful suspicion that something extremely important was in front of her. Will you restore the lost memories? This message appeared on the screen along with the option to select yes or no. Will you restore the lost memories or not? Detective Bell didn't understand what that sentence meant. She tilted her head, and that was when fireworks exploded before her eyes. Something had happened. She didn't know what. Her cheeks were cold, and not just her cheeks. Her lips, right arm, body, and right leg were all chilly too. Not just cold. Something felt hard. Slowly, as her head began to clear, she got a grasp on her situation. The chill, the hardness, this was marble. She'd fallen on the stone floor. It helped Sora gain his memories back so he doesn't fuck up the Kingdom Hearts timeline again. She tried to get up, but her body wouldn't move. Only her right hand, hidden underneath her cape, just barely moved. She could see the white marble floor before her eyes turning red here and there. Without even thinking about it, she understood what it was. Her head ached like it was being squeezed in a vice. Something was flowing from it. Footsteps reverberated from the marble floor. Someone was approaching. They came right up to her and then stopped. She sensed someone was there. Were they the one? Had they struck her and knocked her to the ground? That wasn't a monster. She didn't know who it was, but she could tell it was a magical girl. Detective Bell tried to make sense of all the thoughts in her head. Why had she been targeted? Who had done it? What for? What had she been doing right before she was hit? She couldn't hand over her magical phone or its contents. Wait, she's going to die? She didn't want to die. But would she? Still made it in time, at least? Still make it in time, at least? She had to make it. Could she? Use it. Her magic. The buildings in this game would not oppose their master. They wouldn't answer Detect Bell's questions, but they could still talk to her. They just wouldn't answer if she asked. Still, even if it wouldn't work, somehow, someone had struck her. She didn't know who. Her consciousness was fading. If the one who hit her took her items, it would all have been for nothing. She had to give this to the one person she could trust most. Still face down, Detect Bell kissed the ground and moved her right hand. Noko. An event is now beginning. Players, please gather in the Wasteland Town Square. At first, they were surprised it was already that time. Next came feelings of relief. In the 2 hours since they'd reached the fake throne, all of the magical girl players had joined together in search of the abominable Evil King. The atmosphere was tense, set to explode, and all their eyes were sparkling. Where is the Evil King? If we can just find him, the game will be over. Even if she attempted to calm everyone down, Noko was near her emotional limits too. Her heart was racing. Her breaths came shallow and quick, and she couldn't stop the cold sweat coming from her pores. She couldn't influence the others well when she was like this. She was part of the team in charge of the city area, so the monsters weren't that strong, and since Clantail was guarding her, she didn't have to feel uneasy about battles. Her anxiety had a different source. Clantail was terribly irritated and had been stomping her hooves over every little thing. For a long, long time, every second feeling like an hour, they patrolled the area, suffering, exhausted, and then there was an announcement. The pre-maintenance period event involved a forcible summons. Even if they didn't want to participate, they had no choice. Once the time came, no matter where they were transferred to the square in the Wasteland Town, so the event was unavoidable. All the magical girls gathered in the square seemed tired, and that was understandable.
Huh?
Lazaline made a confused noise.
Where's Belle?
They looked at one another. Detect Bell wasn't there. And Nonoko? Clantail muttered softly. Detect Bell wasn't the only one missing. Nonoko Miyokata and her dragon were both absent from the square.
Actually, it looks like she's not in the wasteland area at all.
Lazaline was checking Detect Bell's position on her phone's map application. Only 3 of their party members were displayed. Noko, Lazaline, and Flea. Detect Bell alone was missing.
Nonoko was...
Petchka, so pale she looked ready to faint at any moment, began telling them what happened, her eyes fixed on a single point on the ground. She wobbled more than once as she explained, and Clantail moved to support her halfway through. At times, Petchka glanced toward Rionetta too, but she was facing away, not even attempting to look at Petchka. The monsters in the library area had assaulted them using entirely new tactics. They'd launched a surprise attack. One had turned into a chair, a wraith had used its own body as a blindfold, and another monster had transformed into a tiny snake to invade Nonoko's body. Petchka said that this had killed Nonoko. Clantail bared her clenched teeth. Petchka no longer seemed about to pass out, and instead looked like she was on the verge of death. As the one supporting her, Clantail couldn't stamp her hooves or yell or vent any of her feelings, and the rage was showing itself on her face. By the time Petchka had finally finished the whole story, standing had become difficult for her, and Clantail lowered her to sit on the fountain side. Flea nodded.
The dragons in the subterranean area have become curiously more coordinated as well. It must be for the same reasons.
Melville, too, talked about the goblins in the mountain area and how they were working together in a way they hadn't before. And those machines that had spawned in the city area, too. The group had beaten them down with their charms and high-powered weapons and armor. So Noko hadn't realized it. but reflecting on it more closely, she got the feeling that the monsters had acted differently than during their previous encounters in the area.
So what about Belle?
Leslie looked at each of the magical girls in the eye in turn. Noko met her gaze and dropped her head reflexively. Leslie turned on her magical phone.
Falsey, tell me please, where's Belle?
For a second, the image of Fall was streaked with noise, a distortion like TV static, that then turned into a dust of golden flakes. Then Fall began to speak as if nothing had happened.
The pre-maintenance period event is mandatory, Poon. After a certain amount of time has passed, any magical girl who has failed to arrive at the square will be forcibly transported to the square, Poon. If any magical girl does not appear here, it means she is no longer playing the game, Poon. What's that supposed to mean?
Leslie asked. Fall's reply was quiet.
It's highly likely that she's dead, Poon.
Leslie stomped hard on the ground.
There's no way! She was in charge of investigating the Evil King's castle! You're the one who said no more monsters would spawn there, right? That's exactly right, Poon. There will be no more monsters in the Evil King's castle, Poon. So then, Belle can't be dead. There's no way for her to die in the Evil King's castle when there's no monsters there and we already set off all the traps. I will now begin explaining the event, Poon. Listen up! Hey! I'm asking you where Belle went.
A gust of wind blew into the square, sweeping up sand. The girls covered their faces with their hands. The breeze passed, sand settled, and Fall began describing the event. It was as if the wind had carried away Lazaline's questions with it.
This event, since you made it to the end of the Evil King's castle, this won't be the usual random event, but a special one. Allow me to distribute a strategy guide for you all, Poon. Everyone, please pull out your magical phones, Poon.
It didn't seem like Fall was taking his time, explaining on purpose, and yet he was speaking rather slowly. It was as if even Fall hadn't been aware of this event.
I don't give a fuck what happened to your friend, Poon. What's the meaning of it? What's the meaning in it now? Melvi is wondering why do you hand out strategy guides at this point?
Leslie translated.
And that bothers me too, but more importantly, what happened to Belle? There, it's been distributed. Alright, this event is now over, Poon. Meow.
The strategy guide application was now installed on Noko's phone. When she launched it, it displayed a message.
I don't care about this thing. What's important is Belle.
Hold on, Lazaline. Flea restrained the other girl, who was ready to dash off. Everyone who checked their strategy guides was frozen. Now that you have reached the throne, you have earned the right to know the secret of the Evil King. The truth is that the Evil King is among the players. She acts in secret for the sake of her own victory condition, killing all other players. Take care not to be killed. The message was so direct that Noko felt its impact like a slam to the head. Everything in her mind turned into a tangled mess, and her knees started trembling. It seemed like everyone else was talking about something, but Noko couldn't hear it. Lee clapped her hands together. The event is over, which means we're not obliged to remain in the square. We should all search for Detect Bell. Avoid going alone. Be sure to keep to groups of 3 or more to stay safe, no matter who the Evil King might be. Before Flea had even finished talking, Lazaline had raced off with Melville and Clantail close behind. Imposter? Among them? Wow. Shadowgate. The interval between the pre-maintenance event and logout was very short. Ultimately, as it was nothing more than a little additional time or an extra break, not enough to be used on anything productive. Following after Lazaline, who had taken the lead, Shadowgale dashed off to the Evil King's castle. Once she reached the castle, she launched Flea's map application and checked for the 4 icons of her party members. Flea's own icon, as well as Noko's, was at the entrance to the Evil King's castle. Then there was Lazaline's, and one more icon that had to be Tekbel. Those icons were on the terrace of the castle, in the shop zone.
Oh, hello, Tabby!
This is a magical girl among us. Were they okay for time? Shadowgale could probably still make it. Wordlessly, she ran with all her strength, her footsteps pounding across the marble floor. She arrived at the terrace, and when she passed through the entrance, her toes touched liquid. A familiar smell hit her nostrils. It was the same thing she smelled back when they logged in after the end of the first maintenance period, when she discovered Masked Wonder murdered. A pool of blood had spread across the white marble floor, and in its center was Lapis Lazuli, hunched over her knees, with Rianetta, Clantail, and Melville standing around her. Clantail was facing away from Shadowgale, toward the outside. Her tail was hanging limp. Rianetta's head drooped, expressionless, while Melville was shaking her head at the 4 magical girls who had come in.
I'm sorry,
she said. Oh wait, it was Melville who said that, I think.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, she said. It's hard to say that with a Scottish accent. Leslie's shoulders were shaking. She knelt in the center of the pool, trembling and heedless of the blood soaking her blue costume as she clutched something. Shadowgale could see shoes, knee socks, a pale gray cape, a limply dangling arm, and a broken magnifying glass. It was Detect Bell. Her head was crushed, a mess of white and red. That was clearly what had killed her. Her costume was in disarray too, and not just because she'd fallen. Her coat had been shredded, her cap ripped, and her shirt and skirt rolled up. The disheveled state of her clothes suggested the killer had been looking for something. They were all speechless, staring at Detect Bell's gruesome transformation. I'm supposed to hand it to the blue magical girl, right? Shadowgale lifted her head at the sudden, unfamiliar voice and looked toward Flea. I thought that was Shadowgale talking. Who said that? Flea also seemed startled, looking back at her. Shadowgale scanned the terrace. Clantail turned back toward them. Rianetta lifted her head. Hechka seemed frightened, and Noko was readying her mop. Melville had faded away, melting into the white of the marble. Still cradling Detect Bell, Lazaline skittered backward. Skittered backward without rising from her knees, placing her back to the wall as she glanced cautiously around her.
Oh, hello, Fuki!
Welcome to death and killing. It hadn't been any of them. That voice hadn't belonged to a magical girl or a fall. It was more human, like the voice of a middle-aged man. Oh, it's the mage that was mentioned before, maybe? No one in the game so far could have talked like that.
Could you move aside?
That same voice again. Shadowgale sensed something odd at her feet and looked down to see a giant face. Oh, right. The face that Detect Bell summoned. She panicked and leaped back. The other magical girls also moved off the face. With the weight gone, the enormous visage made an expression of relief and breathed out of "Ew." For a human face on the floor, it was rather cartoonish in style and expression. But despite that, this whole area was covered in a pool of blood, inevitably including the stylized features, which just made the sight especially grotesque. Shadowgale winced. Oh, hello, Scronin. Welcome. Had a nap and feel great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. The face, which resembled a middle-aged man from an anime or manga, goggled its eyes around, looking at all the alarmed magical girls. It must have had a thought then, as it blew out another phew, started talking. I can't give you any hints. Its big eyes swiveled around and looked toward Detect Bell, still in Lazaline's arms. But I'll do a favor if I'm asked, at least. She said to hand this to the magical girl. She said to hand this to the magical girl in blue. The face sucked in its cheeks, pouted its lips, and spat something out from inside. The object rolled through the pool of blood, trailing a line of fluid that was probably saliva behind it, until it thunked to a halt at Lazaline's feet. It was a magical phone. Goodbye, then. The bulges and dips on the floor disappeared, its outline faded, and everything that had made up the giant face vanished. All that was left was the white marble floor, a great deal of blood, and the magical phone, soiled with saliva and blood. Unfazed by the spit and blood, with Detect Bell still cradled in her right arm, Lazaline reached out to take the magical phone in her left hand and turned it on. It activated. It had probably seen some pretty rough treatment, but it apparently wasn't broken.
This is Bell's magical phone, isn't it?
Detect Bell's magical phone had come out of the mouth of a giant face. Flea sighed on Shadowgale's back. It tickled the hairs of the back of her neck, and it felt gross.
Detect Bell's magic was to converse with buildings, said Flea. Does anyone know how she exercised her magic?
Belle told me she'd kiss a building and talk with the face that popped up there, but she complained that she couldn't use her magic inside the game.
Strictly speaking, I'd wager it wasn't that she couldn't use it, but rather she couldn't get any information from the buildings, Flea said, thinking aloud. She might have been watching the other magical girls' reactions as she did. That would explain what that large face just said. But it seems that even if she couldn't get information out of the buildings here, they would still do her favors. And the favor she asked was to hand this magical phone to you, Lazaline.
Lazaline was staring hard at the magical phone in her grasp.
Detect Bell chose to use her magic to entrust her phone to the face, and even indicated who should receive it, which means there's someone else she didn't want having it. Look, her clothing is in disarray. Most likely someone was trying to steal her magical phone, but they failed. All of them held their breaths, listening intently to Flea as she spoke. We can hypothesize two things at this point. First, the one who attempted to steal her phone was not a monster. He was probably one of the players, the one who killed her, the evil king. Someone let out a tiny yelp. The other thing is that important information is hidden within that magical phone. So important that, despite knowing she was about to die, Detect Bell still tried to leave it to Lazaline, to us.
Oh, I'm glad you like Lazaline's design. It is pretty good. I'm so excited to see all the characters in the anime. I'm so happy they're continuing that. Flea used her phone to launch her magic carpet. She dropped from Shadowgale's back onto the carpet and looked up at the sky. We don't have much time. The sun was still sparkling brilliantly, but in the game, sunset was sudden. Intuitively, Shadowgale knew that it was close to setting. Meow. In other words, she could tell that the logout time was almost upon them. Flea took the magical phone from Lazaline and lowered her carpet by a foot. almost all the way to the ground, so that everyone could see the screen. She began tapping through the magical phone. She checked her party members, amount of candy in her possession, her address book, messages, internet browsing history, memo pad, and then finally stopped on her item list. What's this? The memory restoration device. Shadowgale had never seen this item before. From Detect Bell's history, they could see it had been bought at the shop in the Evil King's castle. Lee launched the application and inspected its contents. Will you restore the lost memories? Yes or no? What does this mean? Lee pressed yes with her finger. The lighting behind the no disappeared and the yes shone white. A message appeared on the screen. Memories have been turned on. The player's lost memories will be restored as of the beginning of the next maintenance period. The time had come. The sun turned to shadow. Shadowgale's awareness faded, and then she was sitting on her bed in her own room as Momori Totoyama. Kanawe was in front of her. She was sitting in Momori's chair, just like she had been before they'd logged into the game again. Suddenly, the inside of her head was as bright and clear as day. The haze disappeared, and all her memories were back. Momori bent over and vomited again and again onto the floor. Petchka. Chica's memories returned, and she took 2 days off from school. The battle in the Evil King's castle had been fierce. The enemies had been strong, and most of all, there had been a lot of them. Missiles flying, explosions, sounds that made her want to plug her ears, and choking smoke. The knight's sword swings had made her arm go numb when she blocked them with her shield. Despite its high plus modifications, it couldn't entirely block the enemy's weapons. Petchka's burdensome presence had meant that Clantail and Rianetta couldn't fight how they wanted and were forced to focus on defending her while she cowered behind them, knees trembling and shield up. She hadn't been doing anything in particular. She'd just been there to be protected. She had made excuses for herself, telling herself that if she fought, she'd only get in the way. She'd been fine with being the protected, doing hardly anything. The turning point had come quickly. Right in the middle of the fight, a bright, red-hot magma had welled in her heart, swallowing up everything. Magma, why would you do that? And engulfed her fear, fretting, anguish, aversion to combat, and everything else. And it turned into loathing for her enemies and a desire to protect her allies, and Petchka had moved to the front line. Now that Petchka was able to protect herself, Rianetta and Clantail weren't so pressed. That was the point when they broke the enemy's line, like water bursting through a dam. In the end, the magical girls were victorious, and they didn't lose anyone. Considering how strong their enemies had been, it was a miracle. Thinking back on it after it was over, paralyzed Petchka with fear, but during the fight, she'd been in a trance, blocking the enemy's attack with her shield and swinging her spatula left and right. An enemy had dodged her attack, then evaded her counterattack, so next she bashed with her shield. Maybe she hadn't been in a trance. She must have been enjoying herself. It was fun to fight her enemies in order to protect her allies, these people who were so important to her. Their next fight had been the one in the library area. Again and again, she'd swung her spatula at the fiend that had been holding down Rianetta. She'd used it to beat away the wraith that had been blinding Nonoko. She didn't even want to think about what had happened in the end. Even so, in that moment, Petchka had felt exhilarated. When she'd been attacking the enemies, there hadn't been anything else in her head except, "Get away from my friends!" She hadn't even thought to be scared or frightened. That was right. Petchka hadn't always been so afraid of fighting. It was true that she wasn't any good at it, Her magic was to make good food, so she didn't have any special physical abilities. She'd never trained nor practiced. But still, she hadn't been so bad that she would bench herself and watch everyone else fight their hardest. She'd known to fight when she had to, and doing it had made her feel great. Why had Petchka come to avoid battles? Why couldn't she move her feet and step up to the front, even in a crisis situation? Now she remembered why.
Yeah, it's good.
Ninomiya was saying, stuffing his cheeks with his first box lunch from her in 2 days.
Man, it really is, you know?
It sounded like he was asking one of his guy friends to agree with him, and though it felt a little funny, she nodded anyway. Ninomiya smiled too, and his friendly grin pricked at Petchka's heart painfully. She understood why she was so drawn to him. He was very much like someone she'd once known. He was so cool and strong when he played sports. He put his best effort for the sake of his future, and he was never lazy or slacking off. But he also liked to talk, and when he smiled, he seemed so friendly. Even the way he enjoyed Petchka's cooking and showered her with compliments.
So good, so good.
Was just like her. A familiar voice sounded in Petchka's mind, the voice of a dear friend who is now gone. Damn, you're such a crybaby, Petchka. It's not worth crying over at all. You always think that you have to do is burst into tears. That all you have to do is burst into tears. She'd said some pretty harsh things to Petchka, too. Relax. As long as I'm here, you won't get a scratch. Just stop crying, seriously. All that wailing really makes me uncomfortable. Hey, Petchka, that wasn't so bad. That last kick was half decent. They'd always been together. Get this out, you guys. Open your eyes. How can you all just lie down and take orders from her? This stuff isn't okay. Run, Petchka! Right up until the end, they'd been together. To Chica, she'd been nothing more than another classmate. She was always making lame jokes and fooling around with her friends. And even though Chica thought privately she was annoyingly loud, she didn't have the courage to scold the other girl to her face. To her, Chica had surely been no more than one of the crowd. She'd been pretty popular in their class, so maybe she didn't even notice Chica. Her clique was good at sports and liked being active, while Petchka's preferred books and always... I said clique, I meant click. While Petchka's preferred books and always occupied the same spot in the library at lunch hour. The two had nothing in common, aside from being in the same class. During the school field trip, they had been set up as a pair for the walk through a haunted forest by drawing straws, and at the time, both of them had probably been annoyed. Chica saw her as just plain, loud, and tactless, while she saw Chica as a bland and boring girl who had nothing in common with her. They couldn't have fun together like friends, and there was no excitement like there would have been between a girl-boy pair. It was the most boring combination. Though the test of courage should have ended with a little fanfare, her adventurous spirit got the better of her, and she had suggested that they go off the arranged path to take a shortcut, leading the outing into an unusual conclusion. Chica had desperately tried to stop her, begging her not to, but an outdoorsy girl brimming with a healthy spirit of adventure wasn't about to listen to an indoor type's attempts at persuasion. Ponytail swaying, she gallantly marched out into the bush, and Chica, who didn't want to be left behind, reluctantly followed after her. The shortcut was nothing but the vestiges of a deer trail, meandering and not at all in a straight line, and before they knew it, they were both alone in the middle of the woods. And neither of them knew where they should go anymore. Chica cried and blamed her companion for her thoughtlessness, while the other girl was put on a tough act, striding forward steadily and insisting this was no big deal. She walked and walked, stubbornly pushing forward until they emerged at a clearing. The tiny little house that looked like either a mountain cabin or a ruin was sitting there all alone. Figuring it might be occupied, the two of them ran toward it, and then once they were a bit closer, they realized someone was standing on the roof. In the silent forest, void of any sound from insects, birds, or beasts, they heard a flute. The clear tone was sucked into the starry sky. The figure on the roof was playing the flute. It was a common children's song, but the sight was so fantastical it captured their hearts. Maybe the reason the insects and birds were silent was in reverence of this instrument. In something of a dreamlike state, the two of them gazed up at the roof, standing silently until the tune was done and utter silence had fallen once more. Ooh, Skitter and Jack! Aww. Chica's breath caught in her throat. It was a very beautiful woman. Her blouse was decorated with frills. Ooh, I think I know who this is. Over it, she wore a jacket, the color of fresh green grass with a rose design. I do know. An amber collar pin held it in the front. Her translucent white thighs were boldly exposed, her legs lithe and slender. Or lithe? I don't think I've heard that word before. While multicolored roses bloomed in the vines that wound around all over her soft-looking, artlessly tied golden hair. The bloom at one of her shoulders was particularly large, a red-purple rose as big as a baby's head. Her facial features were flawless, and her eyes were bright red. In the darkness, the only light came from Chica's flashlight, and yet even though the woman's face wasn't well illuminated, her beauty had been visible. Just now realizing, because of the restart anime, we will see more animated Cranberry. Oh, that's exciting. Most of all, those ears. Just like the forest people, the elves in the fantasy novels that Chica had once read, the pointed tips were poking out of hair that failed to hide them. Good evening. Her voice sounded pleasant. Her voice sounded so pleasant in Chica's ears. It was an ordinary greeting, but it twined about her body and soul. I am the musician of the forest, Cranberry. I am a magical girl. The samurai girl Pechka had met in the game had said, Must I do this wait, sorry, I just remembered who the samurai girl was. Must I do this again? Is it not over? She also said, Is it not over? Come on, musician. Musician, the musician of the forest Cranberry. The name floated up in her mind. Her lost memories returned. The reason Pechka hated fighting was that she never fought to protect her friends. She'd fought to protect herself from her friends. Everyone had accepted the game so naturally, even after they'd learned that dying in the game meant death in real life. While she had cried and wailed, she'd also thought, Oh, I knew it. The strategy guide Paul had distributed to them during the last event had said, The evil king is among the players. One of her friends, one of the magical girls, is the evil king. Thanks for the food. Ninomiya put down the chopsticks. Pechka accepted the box back from him and smiled. It's my pleasure. She stood up, approached Ninomiya, and gently kissed his cheek. When she drew back, his mouth was half open, his eyes wide as he stared at her. Pechka gave him a toothy grin. See you later, then. She turned from the shocked, speechless boy and dashed away. Shadow Gale. Momori was lying on her back in a bed. A thin blanket draped over her. After regurgitating everything in her stomach, she felt a little better, but the nausea hadn't gone away entirely. Kanawe was sitting in the chair, watching Momori. I remember now, said Momori. Yes, me too. I didn't want to remember it, though. Indeed, neither did I. The musician of the forest, Cranberry, the examiner from the time Momori and Kanawe had become magical girls. A total of 104 candidates had gathered from nations all over the world for that magical girl selection exam. Their examiner had been surprised, saying that such a large-scale selection exam was unprecedented, and her sidekick had happily claimed that it would surely be an amazing exam, Cone. Had that exam really been unprecedented, though? Or had it just been utterly mundane to Cranberry? Finally makes sense, said Conaway.
What makes sense?
I never forget the things I've seen, even people I've only ever encountered in passing. I'll always remember once I've heard their names, but I couldn't remember the name of our examiner. Furthermore, I didn't see anything strange about that. Our memories about Musician of the Forest Cranberry and the exam that she oversaw must have been erased by someone. Mamori rolled over toward the wall, turning her back to Conaway. Oh. I love how often they're using the full title for the Musician of the Forest Cranberry. Yeah. It is funny whenever a magical girl has a long name, they're almost always referred to their full name, like Genopsycho Yuma no Shima. Rest in peace. Conaway had nursed Memoria and cleaned up her vomit as well. Maybe she'd done it because she figured that ordering someone else to would have caused a fuss, and then Memoria would be quarantined and they wouldn't be able to see each other. Memoria considered making a crack to the effect of, I must be the first and last person to ever make you clean up puke, miss. But she didn't have the energy to say it aloud. Right now, she'd rather not look at Conaway, if she had the option. It would make Memoria remember, whether she wanted to or not, what had happened during the exam, and what she herself had done. There was nothing left for her to throw up but acid. But anyhow, Conaway went on, I figured out the culprit.
Yeah, me too.
I understand now why I failed, too. Conaway sounded calm and collected. She would not lose control like Memoria. Even now that she remembered what she'd done, what she'd been forced to do to become a magical girl, she was still the same old Conaway Hidokoji, strong, indomitable, and proud. I had estimated that simply examining character and not motive or opportunity would enable me to figure out the culprit, and that judgment was based on experience, founded on the supposition that if a magical girl were to commit a crime, she would use her magic to conceal her motive and opportunity as best she could, and so I judged that I should examine character only. In both the Wasteland Town Square and the Great Dragon's Cavern, I observed their reactions and failed. The culprit used magic to conceal her methods and falsify her facial expressions, disguising even her own character. Conaway's voice turned cheerful. Well, this was all before our memories were restored. I understand now what it was she wanted to steal, even if it meant killing Detect Bell. With our memories returned, she's painted into a corner. We have a clue that one of us is suspicious, and if you go from there and consider her methodology, you'll naturally come to see what she did and how the way she concealed the miracle coin and manipulated Churnamouse's candy stock. I don't even have to show off and play the great detective, explaining to everyone, so-and-so is the culprit and this is how she did the crime. Even the ones who don't understand how she did it will have a vague sense of who she is, since they have their memories back.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
We can't let our guards down around her, even 7-on-1, but it will be concerning if she kills us one by one before we can meet up. We'll gather the others as quickly as possible so as to avoid that. According to the message, she is the evil king. Once we defeat her, the game will be over.
Yeah.
I registered you in our party right before our last session ended. You, Lazaline, Noko, and I will already be together from the moment we log in. But how quickly will the rest be able to convene after that? Worst case scenario, 1 or 2 will die.
You think someone will die?
I want to avoid that, if possible, but our enemy might realize that she'll be under suspicion. She will act. Well, even if some die, we'll minimize the losses. After that, we avoid contact with the enemy for 3 days. Then, when we're forced together for the pre-maintenance event, that's when we hit her.
Oh, the background music. I can link that. It's currently playing Crash to Insanity lo-fi version, the Insanity Island. That's a like a 24/7 YouTube stream of lo-fi video game music. I'm really glad we came across this. Yes. The chair creaked. It sounded like Conaway had stood.
The next login is in 2 days and 22 hours. Until then, rest up.
Momori heard her walking on the carpet. The door opened, then closed. Momori rolled over onto her back. Conaway never changed. Not last time and not this time. Oh, of course. I hope you enjoy. Even among a crowd of 100, Flea was still Flea. She occasionally formed alliances, occasionally broke them, and occasionally caused conflict, all the while manipulating the magical girls like an orchestra conductor. She occupied many positions. The agitator sent them to their deaths, a double-dealing fraudster, a reliable leader, or a heroic martyr. She watched them from above as she maneuvered her pawns, sometimes becoming one herself, tilting the scales, pulling the strings. Even in an apparent situation, a battle royale, she had made full use of her talent, crushed every one of the other magical girl candidates, deceiving them, killing them, or making them kill. The last one, her ally throughout her ordeal, she shot in the back. The girl's limbs had blown away, and her organs had dangled from a tree branch. Blood literally rained down, while Flea conversed with a forest musician who had been watching them from the shadow of the trees. Flea's face, hands, clothes, everything had been soaked red. Not in her own blood. It was the blood of her sacrifice.
In accordance with our contract, said Flea, you should have nothing to complain about here.
What a wonderful show. I would personally request a match with you. Cranberry replied.
That would be a counter to our agreement. My swindling and cajolery isn't the strength you seek anyway. If you're looking for a rival, go elsewhere.
Conaway had looked over at Momori. Her handsome face had warped for an instant, and then immediately went back to a smile.
Shall we go then? I really am somewhat tired.
Momori had been totally ignorant. She hadn't been told of this secret contract Conaway had made with the musician of the forest, or what it was about. When Conaway had mentioned that this was in accord with the contract, Momori had wondered if she would be killed. She thought that perhaps if Conaway's contract was fulfilled, Shadowgale's death might be a part of it, and that had probably revealed itself on her face, and Conaway had noticed that look. The change on Conaway's face had not been anger or disappointment, but sadness. She hadn't even considered that Momori might worry that Conaway would kill her. Momori's baseless fears had wounded Conaway. That was the first time Momori had ever seen Conaway look hurt and then try to hide it. She had never seen her do that since, either. Momori figured their secret contract might have something to do with allowing 2 people to pass. Conaway had made Cranberry an offer on the condition that 2 would pass the exam. Either money or something in the exam, just something. The question was, what about now? Had Masked Wonder been forced to do the same thing, a battle royale? Momori rubbed her eyes with her sleeve. The pillowcase under her head was wet, too. Surely, even with her back turned, Hanoi had noticed she was crying. Mastercide number 9. Once, there was a magical girl named Cranberry. At her selection exam, when she was still very small, there had been an accident. One of the participants had lost control of her magic, and the examiner failed to stop it. It had killed the examiner, and all the participants but Cranberry. They said the cause of the accident had been a flaw in the mascot Fav's functions, which kept things in check. They also said that afterward, Fav had taken Cranberry, still suffering from psychological wounds, and tempted her, driving her to violence. This girl thought that was nonsense. They were just blaming it all on the mascot and cutting off nothing but the lizard's tail, weren't they? The accident had been due to a deficiency in the system. Cranberry had become an examiner because they'd failed to take the proper precautions, and their checks had been lenient too. They were trying to create something noble, magical girls. But they were far too careless with the selection process, and that was precisely what caused this sort of thing. As an examiner, Cranberry had acquired a position where she could select magical girls. Exams were held at her discretion, and the content of these tests had been secret. Cranberry had set the participants in her exams to killing one another, even participating personally to intensify the experience. Then, if a winner remained, she overrode their memories with fake ones of having passed a regular magical girl selection exam. Those battle royales had been extremely appalling, and it had not been uncommon for them to end with no victor at all. At the time, the people of the magical kingdom had praised Cranberry's rigorous spirit for holding such demanding examinations and had not suspected her. The roots of Cranberry's crimes dug deep. She'd had many accomplices aside from her sidekick. This was the reason that her Battle Royale selection exams had not been exposed until the one that would be her last, when the examinees had turned the tables on her and Snow White had exposed her deeds. Until this scandal had come to light, she'd been hailed as a great magical girl. Some had even deified her. No, even after her wicked deeds were exposed, some continued to worship her. Even after Cranberry's death, there had been 2 examiners who still believed in the insane logic Cranberry had espoused, that only the strongest were worthy of becoming magical girls. They had been following in her footsteps until the magical girl in white, Snow White, had unmasked them. The 2 main reasons Snow White had come to be called the magical girl hunter were that she exposed the pair, and that she had called Cranberry to task for her crimes. But the bespectacled girl believed Snow White was not being hard enough. Bespectacled girl who believed Snow White was not being hard enough. The examiners, influenced by her evil deeds, were not the only seeds Cranberry had sown. She had become a very active examiner over a long period of time. Because of her exams, the world was now awash with magical girls who were strong and nothing else. Girls who had no qualms about kicking others down. Who had won the role of magical girl by bloodying their hands. Killers, ignorant of the value of life. They should have not have been chosen. Cranberry was the wrong examiner, and she'd chosen the wrong magical girls. No matter if you erased their memories, no matter how much work they did, at the core, they were not the right kind of magical girls. That was why there was a need for re-examination, but the magical kingdom had just let them be. The higher-ups took the girls to be Cranberry's victims. They hadn't even returned their memories, much less questioned their sins. They'd merely let sleeping dogs lie so the problem wouldn't grow any bigger. It was bullshit. Just what did they think magical girls were? Magical girls were kind. They understood the pain of strangers, and they could think with empathy. They were bold, but they would abhor the idea of killing one another. They were hardworking, smart, and physically capable, filled with a sense of justice and charming. A wise magical girl like that would be able to seek out the evil king and defeat them. For bringing up the cranberry incident, turning her back on the will of the magical kingdom, and carrying out her own exam, this girl would be hated, shunned, and loathed. She was okay with that. It was enough for her if she could just pick out the righteous ones from among Cranberry's children, though that would only happen if any of them were actually righteous at all. Most of them were not. They were all like Magical Daisy, cocky because she'd gotten an anime based on her life, despite being ignorant of her own origins. If they died, then that was as it should be. It would simply mean that they were the wrong sort of magical girl. The right kind would definitely survive, because the gods would choose them. Dang, Cranberry, I guess you fucked it all up. Maybe a little bit. Chapter 10, Petchka in Creature World. Petchka. The real world had been cloudy for the whole maintenance period, with the chance of precipitation hovering between 50 and 70%. It had been a while since Petchka had last seen the sun, but regardless, now it did nothing for her. This sun had only been created for the purpose of illumination, and didn't stir any emotions in her. Same with the blowing wind and haze of dust. They had no meaning beyond serving as part of the backdrop. Petchka squatted, and stood again, pushing off her knees with her hands to get a good stretch. Now logged into the game again, Petchka was in the wasteland area, waiting for Clantail. Their habits were not going to change, even now that their memories were back. Her magical phone chirped, and so she checked it. There was a message from Flea.
This is Flea. I want to convene. Tell me where you are and keep an eye on your surroundings.
I keep thinking, too, we pronounce it Flea. It's spelled P-F-L-E. We just assumed it was pronounced Flea. I wonder if it's pronounced another way, and the anime will reveal this to us. Anyway. Petchka wanted to meet up, too. She replied with her current location. She launched the map application on her phone. It displayed 3 icons in the wasteland area: Clantail, Petchka, and Rianetta. Both Clantail and Rianetta were headed her way. It would be better to wait here rather than wander off somewhere herself. As the wind threatened to blow away her hat, Petchka held it down with her left hand, breathing a sigh. Rianetta's icon was there. She was relieved the other girl hadn't unregistered from their party. It wasn't long before she heard hooves. Someone was racing toward her, kicking up dust. It was Clantail. There were things Petchka wanted to talk about, namely what had happened before. There had been so much at once, one thing after another, and she hadn't been able to tell Clantail the whole story about Nonoko. She and Rianetta had a big fight, but even after that, Nonoko had fought to protect Rianetta, and Petchka wanted to tell Clantail that. She also wanted to discuss the memories they'd regained. Clantail stopped just over 10 yards away from Petchka. Even at a distance, she seemed a little thin. Her cheeks had been rounder before the maintenance period. Her expression was hard. Her right hand floated halfway between reaching out to Petchka and dangling slack. Petchka was about to call out to her, but Clantail spoke first. She sounded like she was trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Lower your weapon." Petchka watched Clantail in puzzlement, but Clantail wasn't looking at her. Her gaze was trained on something behind her. Petchka got a whiff of roses, and something cold touched her neck. She felt metal, and the smell of tempered iron passed through her nostrils, along with the clinging scent of blood. Before Petchka could move a muscle, she was snatched by the back of her collar, flung around like so much cloth or paper, and slammed into the ground. Her magical phone rolled out from her pocket. She meowed. She failed to catch her fall, and her back hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of her. She opened and closed her mouth soundlessly, unable to inhale. The sun was at her attacker's back, and its powerful glare obscured her expression from view. But Petchka could discern the outfit of the magical girl who'd thrown her: her pointed ears, winding vines, large roses, longbow, and javelins. She failed to catch her meow.
Then I come no closer.
She wasn't talking to Petchka. That remark was for Clantail. She had been running up to try to save Petchka, and Melville was ordering her to stay away.
Get ye back!
Melville's javelin was pointed at Petchka's chin. Petchka couldn't make a sound. She couldn't cry for help or run away. And not because her breath was gone. She was too frightened to move.
I'll do it now,
she told herself, but when the moment came, she just trembled, unable to act. She was unbearably terrified of the magical girl behind her and her casual acts of violence. But more than the viciousness itself, it was those vines, those roses, and those pointed ears that inspired such fear in Petchka. She remembered now, the one who'd forced them all into a bloodbath, the musician of the forest, Cranberry. Melville looked so much like her.
Get ye back!
Clantail did not move. Melville dug her toes into Petchka's ribs and rolled her over. It happened so fast, Petchka couldn't even be startled when a pain worse than hitting the ground shot from her fingertips to her brain. Melville's heel was crushing Petchka's right index finger, bending it much farther than it should go. Tears welled in Petchka's eyes.
Get ye back!
Melville lifted her heel and next destroyed Petchka's middle finger on the same hand. Petchka clenched her teeth.
Get ye back!
Then her ring finger. Unable to bear it, Petchka cried out. Pain and fear controlled her body. She felt the retreating hoofbeats through the earth. Clantail was ceding to Melville's demand and backing away. Not long after that, another set of footsteps approached.
What is going on here?
It was Rianetta. She sounded so nonchalant. Petchka raised her head. Rianetta's expression was casual, too. She looked strangely lopsided without her right sleeve, which had been missing since before the last maintenance period.
Well, you needed to explain for me to grasp this situation. Oh, will you be helping me again?
The payment? Rianetta asked.
Same as then. But the situation is different now. The threat to you is much greater now, isn't it? True, Dimpy's one. Double? Goodbye, then.
Hold on! Clantail's roar cut Rianetta and Melville's conversation off. What are you talking about? As if she was taking a stroll, Rianetta stepped forward and gave Clantail, nailed to the spot as per Melville's orders, a sidelong glance.
You speak as if I'm the peculiar one here. But isn't it rather that all of you were simply oblivious? For 10 billion yen, one would expect someone to die, don't you suppose?
What?
It was bound to come for such a terribly strange creatures as magical girls.
Rianetta stopped in front of Petchka.
Cranberry told me before. She recounted the time the Akane be trying to slay Cranberry in the hospital. Them at Meow Meow still be recalling some of the past after her memories were changed. And then Rianetta be meant for coin. Should do out for a price, like I just said.
Lazaline had always translated for Melville, but she wasn't there now, so Petchka could only understand parts of what she was saying. Cranberry had told Melville some things, like that Akane had tried to kill Cranberry in the hospital, that at Meow Meow had remembered a little even after her memories were overwritten, and that Rianetta was obsessed with money and she'd do anything if she got paid.
First threats, said Rianetta, and now you're calling me money obsessed? How vicious.
Rianetta, you... Clantail began. Rianetta turned toward Clantail with a shrug.
I am not the only self-interested individual among us.
After another half-turn, she grinned at Petchka. The claws shot out of her right hand, glinting bright in the overwhelming light of the sun, and swung from Melville's neck. Melville raised her javelin to block the attack. The sound of metal clashing against metal and the harsh groaning of the javelin reached Petchka's ears.
What be this?
Asked Melville.
I can't condone injuring Petchka's hands. I made a promise. Besides, if I kill you, the game will be over, isn't that right? I shan't accept any requests from the evil king.
This time, Rianetta lashed out with the claws on her left hand, and Melville grabbed her upper arm to block that strike as well.
Stay ye back!
Melville wasn't saying that to Petchka or Rianetta. That order was for Clantail, gripping Rianetta's left arm and blocking the right claw with her javelin. Melville kicked up at Rianetta's jaw with her free leg. Well, that was only a guess on Petchka's part, though, once she had witnessed the result. She hadn't even seen what Melville had done. She could hear something ripping through the air with an explosive sound, followed by the heavy smack of a hard object colliding with something even harder, and afterwards, Melville was no longer standing on both legs. One was casually raised in the air. After having withstood soccer kicks from a demon, that one blow shattered Rianetta's head into countless wooden shards and tore her bonnet off into rags.
I'll warn ye again. Stay ye back.
Melville never took her eye off Clantail. Rianetta's body slumped against Melville like a doll whose strings had been cut. Both arms dangled limp until they wrapped around Melville's arms and squeezed.
Did you believe a puppet master would leave her own body exposed?
Rianetta's back split open, and something jumped out. It was a tiny girl who looked just like Rianetta as a human, except one size smaller, and she gripped a knife in her right hand. Melville's arms were bound. The girl kicked off Rianetta's back and leaped to thrust her knife into Melville's face.
My magic is puppetry. Mistaking a doll for my real body has brought about your demise.
She stabbed Melville right between the eyes, jamming the knife all the way in until only the hilt was visible. Melville's expression froze in shock, blood pouring down her face and dripping onto the ground.
Fine work,
she said before forcing her way out of the doll's grip. Knife still in her forehead, Melville grabbed the girl's arm with her right hand, her left going for the girl's neck. Puppet guy from Naruto. Sounds like a good character. A gasp of pain escaped from the girl.
Ow!
Melville didn't reply. Her hand squeezed the girl's neck even harder. Petchka heard bones break as blood dribbled from the girl's mouth, and she just watched, unable to look away. The girl's face twisted in regret, and the wooden body slumped What are you doing? The wooden body slumped against Melville, slid down and hit the ground on its front in a cloud of dust. With the knife still jutting from her head, Melville wrenched the girl's neck, then tossed her aside.
But your trickery be for naught once you've revealed the trick.
Melville's body blurred, then changed shape. The knife that should have been stuck into her forehead was now in her right cheek. She yanked the blade out, and blood gushed from the wound. Tossing the knife away, Melville grabbed Petchka's collar again, roughly picked her up, and ran off.
I must go. I must needs go. Meddlers be coming.
What? What, Scoopy? Noko. Noko's party had started at the Evil King's castle, so now they were running to the wasteland area to meet up with the others. Scoopy was the meddler they were talking about. Noko was pushing herself to sprint as fast as she could, but at that pace, Lazaline had enough breath left to chatter. Of course, since Flea was on Shadowgale's back, she wasn't huffing or puffing either. Glancing at Shadowgale out of the corner of her eye, Noko noticed she seemed pale. Was it because she was having a hard time running? Or because the restored memories were upsetting her? Noko didn't know. As they relentlessly raced over the marble floors of the castle, the thuds of 3 set of footprints echoed and faded behind them.
So is Melvy really the culprit then?
Said Lazaline.
But Belle was in Melvy's party and Cherney too. It just doesn't make sense for Melvy to have killed him.
Think back on her appearance, though, said Flea. Who does she remind you of? Who did Melville resemble? Flea answered that question herself. Yes, the musician of the forest, Cranberry. They look so alike. Of course, it's not simply a matter of looks. Melville is the only one I could consider to be the culprit, the evil king lurking among the players. Flea seemed more on edge than she'd been before the maintenance period. Maybe her restored memories were torturing her too. Melville is the one who stole Masked Wonder's coin, and also the one who manipulated Churnamouse's candy values. Her magic makes both those feats possible.
But Melvy's magic changes the color of her body to blend into the background, right? How could she do those things with that power?
They passed through the gate into the wasteland area. The sound under them went from striking stone to stomping earth, and thick dust billowed up behind them. They had nearly reached Petchka's location. She underreported the scope of her powers, Flea explained. She told us her abilities were more limited than they really were, in order to avoid exposing the crimes she committed with them. I'm positive that her magic includes not only the ability to freely alter her own appearance, but the appearance of anything. If so, she could falsify the display of her own magical phone by using her magic on it. She could make it look as if she didn't have the miracle coin, even though she actually did. And she did the same with Churnamouse's candy. All she had to do was make her phone's screen display a different number from what she actually held, and Churnamouse would have let Melville touch her phone without any suspicion.
Are you being serious?
Asked Lazaline. I'm being serious. I believe that Melville is behind the incident where Genopsycho... Hang on, I gotta sneeze. That scared Scooper. They have texture surprise. They better not have a bungee gum. Is that a One Piece reference? I think. I believe that Melville is behind the incident where Genopsycho took out Meow Meow down with her as well. Or at the very least, I believe she may have masterminded it.
You're just trying to blame everything on Melvy now, ain't you?
Of all of us, Melville would have been the only one capable of hiding Genopsycho immediately when she was killed. She would have taken advantage of the confusion to camouflage the corpse and hide it. Then she'd simply have to retrieve it afterward.
But Genopsycho was alive after that. Me and Cherney both saw her in the Wasteland Town, and when we fought the Great Dragon, too.
She didn't speak with anyone after Akane had cut her up, and that's inexplicable. That would make no sense at all if Genopsycho were acting under her own free will, but Genopsycho's actions do make sense if you assume they were induced by someone else's magic, Melville's accomplice.
Someone was helping Melville?
There's a magic that can control marble statues. Such a skill would certainly control a corpse as well, said Flea. manipulating a corpse with magic. Just imagining it sent violent shivers down Noko's spine.
You mean Rianetta?
Lazaline doggedly opposed Flea's argument. She was not convinced.
Maybe Melvy did do a bunch of bad stuff, worst case. There's no reason for Rianetta to help her with all that. No way.
Well, I suppose you'd have to ask one of them directly. And even if Rianetta weren't proactively cooperating with Melville, you can think of a variety of ways Melville could have negotiated with her, such as bribery, threats, or intimidation. It was absolutely doable for her. And since all this fits so well, that makes it quite likely. It's a Hunter x Hunter reference. You'll figure it out when you get later on. Oh, okay. Lips pursed, Lazaline groaned. She didn't seem satisfied with that.
It's still weird. Melvy had no reason to kill Cherney. Cherney really took to her, and Melvy, I don't want to say it like this, but she sure knew how to use her.
If Melville is connected to Cranberry, then I'd wager that essentially she requires no reason at all to kill anyone. If she told us she did it simply because she wanted to, my only response would be, "Oh, really?" Meow.
Hold on a sec. Sorry, this is kind of basic, but you've been on about Cranberry this, Cranberry that. Who is this person? You said she looks like Melvy?
Flea was startled. It was so unusual for her to let surprise, upset, or any other emotion show on the surface. Shadowgale turned around to look at her. The tension was obvious in not only her expression, but even her neck, and she was clearly nervous. Noko was surprised too.
Huh? What's up?
The look on Lazaline's face said she didn't know what all the shock was about. She tilted her head a bit. Flea raised her eyebrows slightly, as if in an attempt to cover up her surprise, and then her gaze shifted over to Noko. "What about you, Noko? Do you know Musician of the Forest Cranberry?"
Yes.
Noko nodded. She knew that name so well it hurt. Cranberry, the Musician of the Forest, the magical girl who had forced her into a battle to the death to pass her magical girl selection exam. "Well, let's discuss that later," said Flea. "Right now, we have something more important to deal with." Petchka. Petchka's broken fingers hurt so much, she thought she'd lose her mind. She'd have rather just gone crazy already, anyway. Her nails were broken, and her fingers were pointing in all different directions. The worst of them had broken bones poking through the bleeding muscle and skin. Petchka averted her eyes from her right hand. The sight of it made her feel faint. But closing her eyes only recalled the images from just moments ago. On the dark interior of her eyelid, she saw Rianetta, neck broken, dangling limply from Melville's hand. I guess I'll say, too, that I have about 10 pages left, so we're almost done with our reading for tonight. Rianetta had tried to save Petchka. She had apparently been cooperating with Melville for money, but she'd tried to save her teammate anyway. But Petchka had frozen. Right when Melville had been about to kill Rianetta, Petchka could have at least grabbed at Melville's legs. But she'd stayed still. She'd been frightened, terrified, and incapable of reaching out, even though she had returned to the game telling herself that she didn't want to be so passive and helpless anymore. But she still hadn't been able to do anything. It wasn't that she tried and failed. The failure had come before the attempt. She hadn't been able to move, despite the fact that Rianetta might have survived if Petchka had only done something. But Petchka had put herself first and frozen up, just like last time. What must Rianetta have felt when she tried to save Petchka? She'd always complimented Petchka's cooking, going on about how amazing it was. She'd had a sharp tongue, constantly fought with Nonoko, and seemed scary to Petchka from the moment they'd met, but still, she had been a friend. All these things kept whirling and whirling around inside Petchka's head. Meanwhile, Melville was running, carrying Petchka. She'd reached the edge of the wasteland area. From that point, she began running in a clockwise circle. Clantail was chasing her. When she got too close, Melville would hurt Petchka to warn her off. Clantail kept about 20 yards back, following them at a distance, neither too near nor too far. Between the clouds of dust, Petchka could see her teammate's face. She seemed sad, angry too. Either way, it was the first time Petchka had ever seen her with such an expression. Clantail's emotions never showed themselves on her face. Her gestures were what revealed the things she tried to keep hidden inside. When her deer tail whipped up after defeating an enemy, she was triumphant. When it wagged up and down during a meal, that meant she was enjoying it. When she didn't like it, she would rub her front legs against her stomach. Right now, she was making no gestures that suggested what was going on inside her. There was only her face. She was trying to save Petchka. Clantail wanted to save her, but couldn't even get close. Since she was fast, it would have been easy for her to catch up to Melville, but she was concerned for Petchka's safety, and so was forced to keep her distance. Clantail had been the strongest in their party. She defeated the most monsters. She'd been entrusted with the Dragon Killer back during the fight with the Great Dragon. She'd also received +10 equipment from the Evil King's castle. Rionetta and Nonoko had both counted on her to be their cornerstone in battle, and Petchka had relied on her most of all. If Clantail could just catch up, then she'd be sure to win. Melville was very strong. She had fought Rionetta, but Clantail would certainly come out victorious. If I could just slow Melville down somehow. But as the thought crossed Petchka's mind, agony shot through her right arm, and she screamed. Melville had smacked Petchka's left hand with her bow. Even though the blow was only a slap, Melville's strength was atypical, and her long bow, sturdy enough to withstand a magical girl's strength, was abnormally hard. It split the skin on her left hand, and the flesh underneath swelled out as blood poured from the wound. Petchka could see her own bones. Then I move. That alone was enough to stop Petchka in her tracks. Her left arm hurt. She was scared. She knew that Clantail was being forced back because of her, but she couldn't move. Her body was frozen. I'll finish as far you can endure me. Still racing at high speed, Melville flung Petchka ahead of her. Petchka didn't even have time to be startled before she hit the ground. She covered her face with her hands, but both of them were horribly mangled. She writhed in pain as the momentum from the throw sent her tumbling along the ground. And right when she came to a halt, Melville caught up to her. Melville stepped on Petchka's neck to hold her down, and turned around to face Clantail. Stay ye back. Clantail couldn't come close. Melville's foot was on Petchka's neck. One hard lean would break her neck, and Melville knew it. That put her in a position to tell Clantail what to do. Petchka understood that as well, but she still couldn't move. Petchka's neck creaked under the strain. Melville was putting her weight on it. You stay as ye be now, then I move ye. Melville knocked a javelin in her bow. She pulled back the bowstring, aiming for Clantail. Clantail flinched, but there was nowhere for her to run. Melville fired, and the shot ricocheted off Clantail's shield and into a high-rise building a few hundred yards behind her. It blasted the upper part of the building right off. The impact was more than Clantail could take, and she transformed her lower body into an alligator to brace herself as she was thrown back.
Ah, the blessed then shield, eh? Discardy indeed. Distardy indeed. Melville's second and third shots bounced off Plantail's shield, and each one blasted Plantail backward. The javelins kicked up dirt and sand wherever they landed, almost like explosions. Plantail blocked them all with her shield. She wasn't getting hit, but she was hiding behind her shield, shoulders heaving. She had the +10 equipment, but Melville's bow was abnormally powerful and wielded by an abnormally powerful archer as well. Petchka had seen Melville firing javelins many times, yet she had never seen Melville fire with such power and speed, plus modifier or not. Melville had been hiding it. She'd been concealing her true ability, but for what? Had she anticipated that they would start killing one another? Melville knocked another javelin in her bow. Petchka didn't know if Plantail could take one more shot. And even if she did somehow manage to, what about the next one? And the one after that? If Petchka acted, Plantail wouldn't have to just stand there and take it. She could get closer and strike back. But that would mean that Petchka, the hostage, would have to go. Petchka would die. Petchka's arms and legs refused to move. They just wouldn't budge no matter what. She couldn't breathe. But even if she couldn't move her limbs, she could move something else, at least. Some other part. Wait!
Petchka yelled, and then she shuddered at what she'd done.
What?
Melville leaned on her leg. The joints in Petchka's neck groaned.
A magical girl.
The weight on her neck lessened.
A magical girl wouldn't fight this way.
Petchka knew she was provoking Melville. This might get her killed. It would be strange if Melville didn't kill her, though Petchka had thought she'd come here ready to die. The idea made her teeth chatter. It felt like she was being teased, on the edge of having her internal organs crushed. Her heart was preparing for death, but her body couldn't catch up. Her body was crying, I'm scared, I'm scared.
Talk!
Melville didn't take her eyes off Plantail, but her attention was on Petchka. She was curious about what she had to say. Petchka shivered with cold despite the glaring wasteland sun overhead. Petchka explained. Magical girls were strong and proud. That was something that Cranberry had aspired to. She had wanted magical girls to be tough, and that was why she had forced them into those killing matches. What the world needed was not cowardly magical girls who would take hostages to bully their opponents, but the kind who fought fair and square, and defeated their opponents without an advantage. Petchka herself didn't even really understand what she was saying as she went on. Her right hand hurt, so did her left. The weight holding down her neck pressed her face into the ground. She was scared. She was terrified. She felt like her heart was going to stop. She'd been grabbed by the collar and treated like an object, and she'd vomited up the acid in her stomach. Now all she could do was move her mouth, and spit flew from it in an unsightly fashion, but still her mouth was indeed moving. A magical girl didn't need hostages. She wouldn't be running around like this. She wouldn't manipulate candy stores to get rid of someone. She didn't buy allies with money. A magical girl fought the strong, fair and square.
If you fought each other as magical girls, fair and square, someone like you could never beat Plantail.
Melville smiled.
And I be like Cranberry.
Petchka trembled. Melville was just like Cranberry in every way, and that smile, the first smile she'd shown Petchka, was just like Cranberry's too. But Melville was saying she was different.
Victory be the goal. The last one standing be the victor.
She had to stay conscious. No matter if she was frightened and scared, she'd just lay here trembling. She'd be killed anyway. She had to act. Even if she was terrified, even if she was panicking, even if all her limbs were paralyzed, There was still one thing she could do. As a magical girl, Petchka had only ever been protected by others. In order to keep Petchka safe, her friend had let her cheekbones be broken, her jaw be smashed, her face become so swollen she couldn't see in front of her. But she'd still stood up to Cranberry until the evil king had straddled her and punched her to death. But all Petchka had done was tremble. If she had done something, they might have been able to win, but her limbs had frozen up. Then, after it all ended, Cranberry and Fav had started talking as if Petchka weren't even there. Nobody passed last time, or the time before that, or the time before that either, said Cranberry.
If we don't pass someone this time, we're sure to get some complaints, Pum.
I hate to pass this girl, since she barely fought at all, but we could say it's in light of her friend's grit.
Cranberry, you've really matured, Pum.
Compliments won't get you anywhere. When Cranberry, red with blood splatter, had casually announced that Petchka had passed, Petchka had sunk to the ground in relief. The tears didn't come until long after that. She'd even felt thankful to Cranberry, the girl who'd hit her friend right before her eyes to her brutal death. Petchka hadn't even considered her friend who was lying dead right there. Why hadn't she been able to move? Why hadn't she done anything? She wanted to yell at herself for being grateful to Cranberry for sparing her life, to yell at herself for forgetting her friend in her relief. Petchka had sworn to herself that it would never happen again. But she was still scared, shaking, paralyzed, tears and snot dripping from her face. She was hurt, terrified, convinced she was going to die. But... Even if she couldn't move her arms or legs, there was still one thing she could do. Petchka activated her magic. She dragged her speech out for 5 minutes, and her hands had stayed on the ground. To explain Petchka's magic in detail, she could transform anything she touched continuously for 5 minutes into the food of her choice. She would fill a pot with earth and then place her hands on it to turn it into food. This time she was touching the ground directly. In an instant, all the ground within 15 feet of both of them was transformed into cold pumpkin and shrimp soup, and Petchka and Melville were right in the middle. Melville, from her standing position, and Petchka, lying down, were both drawn in by gravity, sinking to the sea. Petchka's hat floated up off her head and onto the surface. Petchka was submerged in soup. She gulped down a mouthful. It was delicious and nutritious, the cooking everyone had told her they loved. Energy welled from inside her. She cast soup. Incredible. Move! 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 Petchka clung to Melville's leg. She couldn't use her hands or her fingers, so she hugged Melville's leg with her arms. Before Melville could kick Petchka off with her struggling, the sea of cold soup ended. With a pop, Melville and Petchka fell down into a big empty space together with the cold soup. There were rock ledges green with moss and lines of stalagmites. The place was familiar. This time, I guess I'll take a picture now. This time they landed in real water. All the bubbles blinded Petchka. It was cold. She landed so hard it felt like her arms would rip off. Desperately, she clung on. They were in the underground lake. The path from the underground lake that connected the subterranean area to the stairs up to the library was right underneath the wasteland area. Petchka hadn't accounted for this. It was unexpected for her, but Melville was stunned too. Petchka wouldn't let go. Finally, Melville kicked Petchka in the face. The water dulled its force, and Melville was a little frantic too. The kick wasn't so bad. Even Petchka could handle it. Melville kicked at her again, but Petchka twisted to avoid it and kept clinging with her arms. Melville's third kick hit her in the shoulder. She could still handle it. Large bubbles burbled up from Melville's mouth. A little longer, just a little longer! Melville's face twisted. She raised her javelin up and swung it down. Petchka looked at the spear, piercing her just above her navel. Red mingled with the orange of the soup, flowing out into the water. Her arm slackened. Melville slipped out and away from Petchka's grasp. "It's so close." Frustration welled up inside her and quickly disappeared. Shadowgale. Shadowgale was running for where they were meant to meet Petchka. She still hadn't made sense of everything in her head. She was sort of listening to Flea's explanation. Unlike Lazaline, she wasn't going to ask questions about what the hell was going on. And she didn't care much about Flea's explanation since she'd heard it already. But more to the point, she just wasn't thinking straight. Her arms and legs were moving automatically, pumping as hard as they could. She was in the lead with Flea on her back. She raced along, unconcerned about their pace, passing by crumbling building after identical crumbling building as they headed for the meeting point. Part of her was relieved by the explanation that Melville was the culprit, that in other words, she was the evil king. Another part of her felt uneasy. Is that really it? Why was she relieved? Because she'd suspected someone else might be the evil king. She didn't want her to be the one, but there was one magical girl that made her suspect that if there was an evil king, it might be her. This was part of the reason for her unease. Flea's explanation was convincing. Melville's costume so closely resembled that of musician of the forest Cranberry that she wanted to be able to talk her way out of it. It made the most sense for Melville to be the evil king. But Shadowgale couldn't relax. Flea felt heavier on her back than usual. She had never felt this heavy before, not until their memories of Cranberry's exam had been restored. Flea had been a very active participant back then. It had seemed as if she'd been proactively cooperating with Cranberry, until Shadowgale had recalled what Flea had been. "Mamori!" Shadowgale was startled. She remembered what she was doing, and she stopped where she was, looking around and wondering what had happened. She was in the same old wasteland, and aside from Flea on her back, there was nothing nearby. Wait, isn't this some Wii music? Yes, I thought so. It's the Me channel theme, not the Wii Shop, silly. It is funny though when that came on. It was like hard to not laugh. Silly Me times 2 combo. I forgot if I read this last paragraph. Shadowgale was startled. She remembered what she was doing and stopped where she was, looking around and wondering what had happened. She was in the same old wasteland, and aside from Flea on her back, there was nothing nearby. She has never felt this heavy before. She now needs the Wii. Nothing? Where are Lazaline and Noko? Shadowgale asked. Who is... I think Flea is saying this. Stopped hearing Lazaline's footsteps first, and after that, Noko's vanished as well. Lazaline disappeared instantly. I'd wager she used her map. Noko sounded as if she'd ran off somewhere. By the time I looked back, she had already vanished, so I think she might have gone into one of the dilapidated buildings on the way. Why didn't you tell me immediately? I did. You were ignoring me. Shadowgale bit her lip. She hadn't noticed it at all until Flea had yelled at her. So what do we do? We're close to the meetup point. Let's go there first. Our priority is making sure we can build a large group. Flea was rational and selfish. She put her own safety first. But Shadowgale thought her suggestion had to be the right thing to do. The weight on Shadowgale's back felt just a little heavier. As Flea had said, it wasn't long before they arrived at their goal, but Petchka wasn't where she was supposed to be. What? Instead, there was a magical phone, the wreckage of a doll that looked like Rianetta, and a tiny girl lying still on the ground. When Shadowgale lifted her in her arms, her head dangled. She was already dead. There is no point in using any recovery medicine now. Shadowgale gently closed the girl's eyes. Her face looked like Rianetta's.
Well then,
said Flea.
What do you suppose happened?
Looks like there was a fight. Shadowgale turned around to find nothing. No one was there. High-rise buildings dotted the wasteland, stretching into the horizon. Scanning left to right, checking ahead and back, she saw it was all the same.
From this point, we split up.
Flea pulled out her magical phone, summoned her carpet, and slid down from Shadowgale's back onto it. She prompted Shadowgale to pull out her phone, too.
You're registered as part of our party now. You should be able to tell where Noko is, right? Go and search for her.
What do we do about Lazaline? Flea's eyes were on the screen of her own magical phone. She had the map application activated. She was checking her party members' current positions. Flea's icon was right here. Noko was a little ways away, and Lazaline's icon was nowhere to be found.
Lazaline isn't in the wasteland, at least. Leave her be.
And you, miss?
The others are probably fighting Melville. I'll head over to back them up. We must defeat Melville, or none of us have any hope.
Then is this really the time to be looking for Noko?
You think there's a reason she left us?
Why had Noko left Shadowgale and Flea just now? Shadow considered it, but couldn't think of anything.
That's another serious cause for concern, said Flea. There's some risk in splitting up, but our numbers are limited, so we have no choice. If you feel you are in even the slightest danger, flee immediately. Don't forget, if you sense danger, run.
And that is where I was planning to stop for tonight. Let me rotate myself. Hi. That was very fun. I always enjoy these reading streams. So our next reading stream, which I do every third stream of mine, we will finish book 3, and in doing so, finish the restart arc. So you will be fully prepared for the anime. And so will we. Because we have already read this book, but it's been a while. I remember who the Evil King is, and I remember who survives, but I don't really remember too much of the other details. So I'm excited to see how it all ends. Oh, of course. It's always fun. I really love how it's like a collaborative stream too, with headmates doing various characters. Oh, thank you so much. I love to hear that. I will go over our schedule really quick. We have posted our schedule on Twitch, and we'll post it over on Twitter tomorrow. But tomorrow night, Snuggle is continuing Tulip. Then Tuesday, Idol is going to play Heart Chain Kitty, and also probably be starting Crop after finishing Heart Chain Kitty. So I think that should be a pretty short game. Heart Chain Kitty, that is. And then Wednesday night, Magma was going to do a watch party of Half-Life VRAI Act 3 behind the scenes. And also, we'll do a little more Demon Turf custom levels. Then let's see. Then our next stream would be Friday with me continuing Freedom Planet 2. And I also really hope to be able to finish Freedom Planet 2 so that Magenta will be able to start Nira's story the following week. So I will do my best to be able to finish the game, but we'll just see how it goes. I am noticing how there's a lot more content in Freedom Planet 2 than 1. 1 didn't really feel short of a game, especially being able to play as 3 characters. But with Freedom Planet 2, not only can you play as a new character, a 4th character, but it's taken me at least 3 streams. And before, a lot of I think Magma was able to finish in 1 stream, and Snuggle and I came close to finishing in 1 stream. So it's quite impressive how much longer they have made the second one. Anyway, and then Sunday, week from tonight, or last night, depending on what you consider Sunday, Q will be playing Splatoon 2, specifically story mode, but who knows, we might also be playing a little bit with friends or something in the online world of Splatoon, maybe. And also, if you're not aware, we should have... Oh, this is Splatoon 2. We still haven't purchased 3 yet. Probably soon. With, I think, actually, Fabebot was helped convince us to stream Splatoon, because I think seeing everyone play the the online what do you call it, not the battles, the online matches, we're worried that we would come off too like antisocial if we wanted to focus more on the story mode. But seeing one of our friends stream the story mode, it felt like, oh, I guess sometimes people simply stream the story mode. We shouldn't be overthinking this. That's silly. Then Q played through, as you might know, the story mode of Splatoon 1. We kind of like to space things out so that we, if we're playing like multiple games in a series, we usually like to space things out a little bit and have like a couple other streams in between games. But yeah, now she's back at Splatoon, starting up the second. And eventually we'll get to that 3rd game. See what all the fuss is about. Anyway, I was going to say, if you're not aware, we should be, I believe, having a Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog watch party in just a few minutes, possibly, if Fuki's still there. Over at Fukuma Song's Twitter. And Snuckle was going to join in on that. Look forward to that. Or bed, if you're going to bed now. Or your work, whatever you're headed off to. I'm going to raid Snarky, who's doing VR chat. Making sure I have it. Sorry, I bumped my mic. Anyway. I hope you enjoy Snarky or Pookie or whatever it is you might be doing after this. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night. We look forward to seeing you next time. Please take care of yourself. And don't let Melville crush all of your fingers and your skull. It's important.